She kept her head down, clearing champagne glasses while they mocked her simple dress. "Look at that poor thing," they whispered. "Probably can't even afford designer clothes." Then footsteps approached, and a familiar voice said softly, "Hello, darling." The room went dead silent as she looked up into the eyes of the man whose penthouse they were standing in. The billionaire everyone had been desperately trying to network with all evening. "Where are you watching from?" Tag, someone who needs to see this revenge story. In the heart of Manhattan's glittering social scene, where champagne glasses caught crystal light and designer gowns swept marble floors, 24-year-old Lily Monroe moved like a shadow among giants. Her fingers, still stained faintly with watercolor from her afternoon art classes, gripped a silver serving tray with the kind of determined grace that only comes from necessity. Most evenings, Lily stood before easels in a cramped community center classroom, watching wide-eyed children discover magic in brushstrokes and color. But tonight she served caviar and vintage wine to people who spent more on a single earring than she made in 3 months. The irony wasn't lost on her. This daughter of a woman fighting cancer, working 2 jobs just to keep their heads above water, while surrounded by an ocean of wealth that could solve all her problems without so much as creating a ripple in anyone's bank account. She had sewn her dress herself, fingers working late into countless nights by the light of a desk lamp in her tiny studio apartment. The fabric came from a discount bin, a beautiful midnight blue that reminded her of Van Gogh's Starry Night, but she had transformed it into something elegant, something that might let her blend into this world of privilege for just one evening. Every stitch carried her hope, her pride, her desperate desire to belong somewhere beyond the margins of society. The ballroom itself was a cathedral of excess, with its soaring ceilings painted with cherubs and gold leaf that caught the light from massive chandeliers. Women draped in diamonds worth more than houses laughed behind manicured hands, while men in perfectly tailored tuxedos discussed stock portfolios and yacht purchases. And there, moving quietly between them with practiced invisibility, was Lily, collecting empty glasses and pretending she couldn't hear the casual cruelty that wealth so often breeds. She had almost made it through the evening unnoticed when Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade through silk. Victoria, with her platinum blonde hair swept into an architectural sculpture and wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars, had the kind of beauty that demanded attention and the cruel confidence that came from never being denied anything. Her laugh was musical and sharp, designed to draw crowds and cut down anyone who dared stand in her spotlight. "Is this the servant trying to pretend she belongs?" Victoria announced to her circle of equally polished friends, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby guests to turn and look. The words hit Lily like a physical blow, stopping her mid-step as conversations around them began to quiet. Anticipation thick in the air like perfume. Lily felt her cheeks burn as dozens of eyes turned toward her, scanning her homemade dress with the kind of scrutiny reserved for imposters and intruders. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time all evening, and it was exactly what she had feared most. "Did you sew that from curtains, sweetheart?" Victoria continued, circling Lily like a predator who had found wounded prey. The socialites' friends tittered behind their champagne flutes, their laughter creating a soundtrack of humiliation that seemed to echo off the painted ceiling. Victoria's eyes glittered with malicious delight as she raised her wine glass, the deep red liquid catching the chandelier light like liquid rubies. What happened next unfolded in slow motion, each second stretching into an eternity of horror. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand moved with deliberate precision, tilting her glass until the expensive wine cascaded down in a perfect arc. The burgundy liquid struck Lily's chest with shocking coldness, spreading across the midnight blue fabric like blood across a battlefield. "Oops," Victoria said with mock innocence, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. My hand slipped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft drip of wine hitting the marble floor. Lily stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a sea of faces that ranged from amused to embarrassed to openly delighted at the spectacle. The wine soaked through her carefully crafted dress, the fabric that represented so many hours of hope and work now ruined beyond repair. She felt exposed, humiliated, reduced to nothing more than entertainment for people who had everything and valued nothing. The laughter began slowly, a ripple that spread through the crowd like wildfire, growing louder and crueler with each passing second. Lily stood there powerless, alone, drowning in a room full of people who saw her pain as their amusement, her dreams as their joke, her humanity as irrelevant. The laughter that had filled the opulent ballroom like poison gas suddenly died, cut off as if someone had sliced through the air itself with a knife. The massive crystal chandeliers seemed to dim, and even the soft string quartet in the corner faltered mid-note as every head in the room turned toward the grand entrance. The atmosphere shifted so dramatically that Lily could feel it like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. Through the towering mahogany doors stepped Sebastian Cross, and his presence commanded the room in a way that money alone could never buy. At 28, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard, never needed to demand respect because it was simply given. His tailored Tom Ford tuxedo fit him like it had been sculpted rather than sewn, and there was something in his dark eyes that suggested depths most people would never be brave enough to explore. The whispers began immediately, rippling through the crowd like electricity through water. Sebastian Cross, heir to the Cross Industries empire. A man whose quarterly earnings could fund small countries, whose investment decisions moved stock markets across 3 continents. He was Manhattan royalty in the truest sense, the kind of man who appeared on Forbes covers and whose romantic life was dissected in tabloids with the enthusiasm usually reserved for celebrity scandals. As he walked across the marble floor, his footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, each step deliberate and purposeful. Lily stood frozen in her wine-stained dress, still feeling the burn of humiliation on her cheeks, still hearing the echo of Victoria's cruel laughter in her ears. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape this nightmare of public shame. But Sebastian's approach held her captive like a deer caught in headlights. He moved past the clusters of New York's most powerful elite as if they were merely furniture. His gaze locked on her with an intensity that made her heart race for entirely new reasons. Without breaking stride, he reached into his jacket and withdrew a pristine white handkerchief, the fabric so fine it seemed to shimmer in the chandelier light. The monogram SC was embroidered in silver thread, a small detail that probably cost more than Lily's monthly rent. When he reached her, Sebastian's voice cut through the silence with the clarity of a church bell, each word delivered with perfect diction that carried to every corner of the ballroom. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my wife." The words hit the gathered crowd like a physical force. Wine glasses slipped from manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a symphony of crystal destruction. Cell phones appeared as if by magic, their camera flashes creating a strobe light effect as the social media vultures began their feeding frenzy. The gasps that rose from the crowd were audible, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Victoria Sterling, who moments before had been the picture of cruel confidence, now stood with her mouth agape, her perfect composure cracking like expensive porcelain dropped on concrete. Her face cycled through a rainbow of emotions: confusion, disbelief, rage, and underneath it all, the dawning realization that she had just publicly humiliated the secret wife of one of the most powerful men in America. Lily felt the world tilt on its axis, her mind struggling to process what was happening. She looked up into Sebastian's eyes, searching for some explanation, some indication that this was all an elaborate joke. Instead, she found a steady gaze that seemed to anchor her even as everything else spun out of control. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered words that only she could hear. "Play along," he said, his voice low and urgent but somehow reassuring, "or they'll eat you alive." The tremor that ran through her body was visible to everyone watching, but Sebastian's steady presence beside her provided an anchor in the storm. With a small nod, barely perceptible to anyone but him, Lily agreed to step into this dangerous game of pretense. Sebastian's hand found the small of her back with practiced ease, guiding her through the crowd that parted before them like the Red Sea. Every step they took together was photographed, analyzed, dissected by hundreds of eyes that had suddenly elevated her from invisible servant to the most fascinating woman in the room. As they moved toward the exit with elegant precision, Sebastian maintained the perfect image of a loving husband protecting his wife from unwanted attention. The crowd followed their progress with hungry eyes, desperate to understand how this unknown woman had captured the heart of Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. Once outside in the cool Manhattan evening air, away from the suffocating attention of the ballroom, Sebastian finally spoke the truth that would change everything. "You saved me from that trap," he said, his formal mask slipping to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. "Now let me save you." The elevator that carried them to Sebastian's penthouse was a private express that climbed 73 floors without stopping, rising through Manhattan's glittering skyline like they were ascending to another world entirely. Lily watched the city shrink below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, each twinkling light representing lives and dreams and struggles that suddenly felt impossibly distant from the rarefied air she now found herself breathing. When the doors whispered open, she stepped into a space that redefined her understanding of luxury. The penthouse stretched before her like a modern cathedral, with 20-foot ceilings and windows that offered a 360-degree view of New York City. Central Park spread out like a dark emerald in the urban landscape, while the Hudson River snaked silver in the moonlight. This wasn't just wealth. It was power made manifest in marble and steel and glass. Sebastian moved through the space with the casual ease of someone born to such grandeur, pouring 2 glasses of wine from a bottle that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. But when he turned to face her, the businessman's mask had slipped away completely, revealing something raw and surprisingly vulnerable underneath. He had loosened his bow tie, and somehow that small act of informality made him seem more human, more reachable. The contract he placed on the glass coffee table was bound in leather and sealed with the kind of legal language that spoke of serious money and serious consequences. 12 months, he said, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite identify. 12 months of marriage in the public eye. Your mother gets the best cancer treatment money can buy at Memorial Sloan Kettering. No expense spared, no treatment denied. And when it's over, you get your own art studio in Soho, fully funded, with enough backing to turn your teaching into something that could change lives on a scale you've never imagined. The numbers on the page blurred as Lily tried to process what he was offering. Her mother's medical bills had been consuming her life like a slow-burning fire, each treatment cycle bringing them closer to financial ruin, even as it offered hope for survival. The experimental treatments, the specialists, the medications that insurance refused to cover, all of it could disappear with a signature on this impossible document. "I had to know who you were the moment I saw you," Sebastian continued, and there was something in his voice that suggested this wasn't just about business arrangements and public appearances. His research had been thorough. She realized with a mixture of gratitude and unease. He knew about her mother's stage 3 diagnosis, about the community center where she taught art to kids who had never held a paintbrush before, about the tiny studio apartment in Queens where she stretched every dollar until it screamed. The resistance that rose in her throat tasted like pride mixed with fear. This wasn't charity, he assured her, reading the conflict in her eyes with surprising accuracy. This was a business transaction that happened to benefit them both. He needed protection from his mother's relentless matchmaking attempts and the social vultures who circled him at every public event. She needed resources that could literally save her mother's life and transform her own in ways she had never dared to dream. "I don't believe in love," Sebastian said, and the words carried the weight of old wounds and careful distance. "I believe in contracts, clear terms, defined expectations, mutual benefit, no messy emotions to complicate things." But even as she signed her name with hands that trembled slightly, Lily wondered if either of them truly understood what they were setting in motion. Within hours of their arrangement becoming public, her name was trending on Twitter. Her face was on the front page of the New York Post, and her phone was buzzing with interview requests from every major news outlet in the country. Moving into the penthouse felt like stepping into someone else's life entirely. Her few possessions looked impossibly small in rooms designed for entertaining heads of state and captains of industry. But Sebastian's mother, Margaret Cross, made her disapproval known during their first meeting with the kind of cutting politeness that wealthy women had perfected into an art form. This woman, whoever she was, clearly didn't belong in their world of old money and older traditions. Victoria Sterling's response was more direct and infinitely more dangerous. The humiliation at the gala had transformed her from casual cruelty into focused vengeance, and she began mobilizing her considerable social connections to dig into Lily's past and present with the dedication of a private investigator. Yet as the days passed in their strange new arrangement, something unexpected began to happen in the quiet moments between public appearances. Sebastian would find Lily painting in the early morning light that streamed through the penthouse windows, and he would pause to watch her work with an intensity that had nothing to do with their contract. She began to notice how he would grow quiet when they passed children on the street, how his jaw would tighten with some old pain he carried like a stone in his chest. "You make this cold house feel like home," he told her one evening as they stood together on the terrace, the city lights stretching endlessly below them. And later, when she caught him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, he admitted something that cracked the careful walls he had built around his heart. "You remind me of someone I lost," he whispered. And in that moment, their carefully constructed business arrangement began to transform into something neither of them had bargained for. The whispers began at a charity luncheon on the Upper East Side, where Manhattan's elite gathered to write checks for causes they would never truly understand. Lily sat beside Sebastian at a table that cost $20,000 to sponsor, surrounded by women whose jewelry could fund entire school districts, when she caught fragments of a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Meridian Project," one of the wives was saying to another, her voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone discussing the weather. "Such a shame about those old tenements in Queens. But progress is progress, isn't it? Those people will find somewhere else to live." The words hit Lily like physical blows, each syllable carrying the weight of a truth she had been too blind to see. Queens, her Queens, the neighborhood where she had grown up on streets lined with fire escapes and corner bodegas, where Mrs. Rodriguez still hung her laundry from the third-floor window, and where Mr. Chen had run the same grocery store for 30 years. The place where she taught art to children whose families worked 3 jobs just to pay rent on apartments with thin walls and thinner hope. That evening, while Sebastian attended a business dinner, Lily found herself alone in his study, surrounded by the kind of wealth and power that could reshape entire city blocks with the stroke of a pen. The mahogany desk that dominated the room was larger than her childhood bedroom, its surface polished to mirror perfection and bearing only a few carefully selected items that spoke of both success and isolation. The files she discovered were organized with military precision, each folder labeled and dated with the kind of meticulous attention that suggested this project had consumed months of planning. The Meridian Project spread before her like a blueprint of destruction disguised as progress. Luxury condominiums rising where century-old brownstones now stood, boutique shops replacing the family businesses that had served the community for generations. A complete transformation that would price out everyone she had ever known and loved. The acquisition list made her hands shake as she read name after name of properties already purchased. The Martinez family, whose daughter Sophia was one of her most promising art students. The elderly Kowalski couple who had lived in the same apartment for 47 years. Building after building, life after life, systematically erased to make room for something shinier and infinitely more profitable. When Sebastian returned home that night, he found Lily standing in his study with the evidence of his betrayal spread across his desk like accusations written in black and white. The look on her face was something he had never seen before, a mixture of heartbreak and rage that transformed her gentle features into something fierce and unforgiving. "You used me," she said, and her voice carried a quality he had never heard from her before. Each word sharp enough to cut. "You destroyed the place I come from. You sat at my dinner table. You met the kids I teach. You listened to me talk about my neighborhood like it was something precious and worth saving. And all the while you were planning to tear it all down." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the city far below. Sebastian stood frozen in the doorway of his own study, watching the woman he had come to care for more than he had ever planned to care for anyone, and saw in her eyes the reflection of every terrible thing he had become in his pursuit of success and profit. "I canceled the project 2 weeks ago," he said finally, the words coming out like a confession extracted under torture. "Because of you. Because watching you teach those kids, seeing how you light up when you talk about your neighborhood, made me realize what I was about to destroy. Not just buildings, but lives. Not just apartments, but homes. Not just profit margins, but people." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Lily searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that this was just another manipulation in a life built on carefully constructed deals and strategic relationships. But what she found instead was something raw and vulnerable that she had only glimpsed in their most unguarded moments. Sebastian moved to a painting that hung behind his desk, a small watercolor that seemed out of place among the expensive oils and contemporary pieces that decorated the rest of the penthouse. It was a simple scene in a woman teaching a child to paint in a garden filled with wildflowers. But there was something in the first strokes that spoke of love and loss in equal measure. "She painted this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My real mother, not Margaret, who raised me after the accident, but the woman who taught me that money without compassion is just numbers on a page. She died when I was 12, and I've spent every year since then forgetting the lessons she tried to teach me about what really matters." He turned back to Lily, and she could see tears in his eyes that he was too proud to let fall. "She would have loved you," he continued. "She would have seen in you everything I lost when she died. The kindness, the way you see beauty in broken things, the way you believe people can be better than they are." The truth hung between them like a chasm they weren't sure they could bridge. Love and betrayal intertwined so completely that neither could tell where one ended and the other began. Both felt unworthy of forgiveness. Both carried wounds that ran deeper than either had been willing to admit. In that moment, their carefully constructed marriage of convenience crumbled, leaving behind something far more dangerous and infinitely more real. Victoria Sterling slid a check across the marble table at the plaza. $5 million. "He's just using you," Victoria said coldly. "You're a prop in his empire. Do you really think Sebastian Cross could love someone like you?" Lily left the check untouched and walked away. That evening, she found Sebastian in his study. "No more contracts," she said firmly. "No more lies. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly. I fell in love with my fake wife," Sebastian whispered, his voice breaking. "I fell in love with your paint-stained fingers and the way you see beauty in broken things." The contract burned in the fireplace, pages curling into ash. They chose each other without obligation. They chose love over convenience, truth over performance. Lily had never been just a simple woman from Queens. She was the only person in that ballroom who possessed something money couldn't buy. She was authentic, real in a way that cut through their facades. She was worth choosing, had always been worth choosing, and in choosing her freely, Sebastian discovered he too might be worthy of love in return. She walked in with a tray. She walked out with a future. They laughed at her dress, but they couldn't copy her dignity. Not every woman in rags is broken. Sometimes, she's the one holding the thread. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember being simple doesn't mean being small.